some basics of embroidery. I say a lot, and I apologize. It's going to keep happening. I don't know how much of an intro you want me to do. There's not really much to say. So I'm just going to go right in. People who are watching live, do I have to go over the very, very basics, like how to thread a needle, or do you guys know how to do that?
I surprisingly do know how to thread a needle.
Yeah, I got that.
Okay. Okay, so, embroidery is one of those arts that looks a whole lot more impressive than it actually is, and when you actually learn how to do it, embroiderers don't look nearly so scary, except maybe for dedication to doing really big and annoying things. Pretty much all embroidery comes down to taking pretty thread and poking fabric until you've made a pretty pattern. And you can embroider ridiculous things without ever learning a formal embroidery stitch if you really wanted to. Just play with things and go crazy. There are a lot of rules for embroidery. Most of them don't actually matter. If anyone who's watching this who judges Dragon Masters or anything, forget I said that. I totally follow all the rules all the time. But as far as everybody else goes, they'll tell you absolutely never put a knot in the end of your embroidery floss, or, never use this stitch on this kind of fabric or whatever. Whatever. Doesn't matter. The one rule that you should follow, that I don't know if I can make it show up on the screen or not, is you really should always separate your floss. Most commercial embroidery floss is going to come in a string of 6 threads, like this guy here. Don't just use the thread like this. For one thing, it's really hard to find needles that will actually hold all 6 threads in the eye without it taking 20 minutes to thread the needle. Also, it's going to look messy, and you don't need thread that thick. If you're trying to make a line that thick, you just want to use a stitch that will make a line that thick. So, the way that you separate your floss is you take one of the pieces right here. It's a really hard thing to show on a camera. You have one thread, pinch the rest, and you pull it out. And you pull out as many strands as you want. Most stitches, you're really only going to use 2 or 3. And then you thread the needle. I've got my needle already threaded. And you start sewing things. So, I'm just going to go over some very basic embroidery stitches, and then a couple of slightly more advanced techniques. I'm not going to do anything crazy, because, heck, I don't use most of the crazy stuff. But we'll do a couple cool things. So, this is where I'm going to attempt to make the camera show my embroidery hoop without just showing you a picture of my cleavage. Here we go. So, I was already doing some doodling on this one, which is why there's already stuff. I'm going to start with the stitch that most of you probably already know, but is a good reminder, and that's the back stitch, which makes a straight line. Fancy. You're going to bring your floss up. Can people see that? All right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. You bring it up. Got your thread through. Bring it down. Pull through again. Go one stitch. Go a little further down. So that it's further down the line. Pull it up. And move the needle back. And you just keep doing that until you've made your line. That's the easiest way to make a straight line. There's another stitch called a stem stitch that is another way that one tends to make fairly straight lines, easier for curves. I am terrible at stem stitch, and thus I'm not going to show you how to do it. But if you think you have better hand-eye coordination than me, I recommend looking up that. My favorite stitch, and the stitch that you'll probably see people use most often, other than something like a back stitch, is a chain stitch, which is actually what that little spiral is right there, because I was bored. I'm going to teach you how to do it backwards, because I honestly don't know why people do it forwards. Backwards is so much easier. So for this, you're going to start by going through and making a tiny little stitch in your fabric. Not get the thread caught on everything. You've got a little tacking stitch right there, and you got it. Then you're going to bring the needle up a little further down, pull it through, and then you're going to slide your needle under that tacking stitch. Take it over. Pull it through, get it caught on your engagement ring, and then you're going to go back down into the hole that you started. So,
the hole that you started for the first stitch, or the hole that you started for the second stitch?
For the loopy bit, so that you end up with a tiny loop that is anchored by that tiny stitch. Then you bring up your needle again. And you pull it through. Slide your needle under the loop that you just made.
Yep. Julia, can I pause you for 1 second?
Yep. Right. So I was saying, with the chain stitch. So, slide your needle under that loop. And then bring it down again. Make another loop. And keep doing that. You make a line of loops that, lo and behold, look an awful lot like a chain. Hence the oh so descriptive name
I don't have much green.
of a chain stitch. So, you can do, like,
I don't have much in the one
I'd say
green. You can look.
75% of the things that you actually want to do using those two as a variation if you really
Don't
want
move
to.
anything. Unless it's out of the scrap bin.
But this would be a very short class, and this is the only two I'm going to teach you. There's one more stitch that you'll see a lot that's very useful, both as a filling stitch and a line stitch, which is called a split stitch. And for a split stitch, the main advantage of that over a back stitch for lines is it'll make a thicker line. But it works a lot like the back stitch. We're going to start by pulling it up and making a single stitch, which is the way that pretty much 90% of stitches start. But instead of making something further along, actually going to bring your needle up in the middle of that stitch you just made so that you're splitting it. These stitch names sometimes are so redundant that I feel like I'm just talking in circles. Mike, what thing? So,
And it seems fairly self-explanatory, but the idea is to go through the thread.
yep, you go through the middle of the previous stitch and keep going until you end up with a line that's about twice as thick as the thread that you started with. And split stitch is also a very good one if you just need an even filling stitch. It's the one that I usually use for filling. So you just keep doing row after row of that, and you get a fairly even color. And a very nice texture. So those are my basic standbys. There are a couple things that I want to show as just kind of cool effect stitches, as it were. One that is very useful to Amtgarders in particular, anyone who does medieval stuff, is one. It's called feather stitch, but what it's most useful for is making things that have scales.
Which need? Just watching.
So
Yeah,
you're gonna start
trying to see.
by pulling your thread out, and then putting it back in. But you're not going to pull it all the way through. Leave it in a little loop. You're then going to poke your needle through a little bit below the loop. Use it to catch the loop.
Okay.
Like so. Pull it through. So you've now made this tiny little U shape. And you can continue doing that. So, I'm going to do it again. Still attach to that first one. Make another loop. Stab myself in the hand. Bring it through. Catch the loop. Pull it. And now you've got two of them. And you can just kind of keep doing that. You do one row. I've done a couple of... Whoop! Yeah, hold on. I dumped a glass of water on my table. Hold on a second, please.
Pause.
Okay. Right, so... you start with a few. You can do multiple rows of them next to each other to make something like scales. You can also use them for feathers. Particularly if you were, say, doing something shiny like a phoenix, you can add beads to different points, either threading them on as you go or adding them in later. I recommend adding them in later because they're really hard to balance on those loops. That is the feather stitch. I greatly enjoy it. Then there is a separate technique that makes super sense when someone explains it, but when someone just says it, it makes no sense whatsoever. That's called couching. Couching is any combination of stitches where you're basically using one stitch to hold down another piece of thread or a ribbon or anything like that. So, hold on, I want to find a contrasting piece of thread to do this on. So, pretend this is something cooler than the random piece of thread that I just grabbed. And I want to attach it without drawing it through the fabric. Maybe it's delicate, maybe I don't want to interrupt the design, any number of reasons. So, I lay it on the fabric as I want it. If you're so inclined, you can use something to hold it in place.
We can't see. There you go.
There it is.
Yep. Okay.
Sorry, I was readjusting it. Basically, basic couching is just put the thing on the fabric, and then use another piece of floss to tack it down. So, here's my red thing. Here's my soggy green embroidery floss. And we're just going to pull it through and hold it down. Just keep doing that along the length of it. Couching is what's used at the basis of gold work, which is super ridiculous and fancy. And if you ever see a piece of it, it's absolutely gorgeous because gold work involves actual gold thread which doesn't work too well to draw it through the fabric, which is why you couch it in place. Fold work is crazy. The idea of couching is also used for a lot of different lattice kinds of fillings, which are exactly what they sound like. Basically making a lattice design with your thread and holding it in place. I'm going to show you the very basic idea behind that. So, first of all, in the interest of speed, I'm just going to do a bunch of them. Lattice is great for filling when you want it to be a little bit more open. Or if you're looking to make a particular effect. A lot of people will incorporate beads in it. Really incorporate beads with anything. And I will show you when it gets to the part that's actually important. This is me putting the foundation work in. I never stitch as fast as I want to stitch. Alright. So right now, what we have is a small grid of threads. They're just pulled through. Right now, there's nothing securing them down, so they wiggle. They don't look very good. So what you do is you're going to tack each one of them down. In this case, I'm using the same color thread. You can use another color thread if you want. People can do some crazy patterns with this. This is a really hard one to do without seeing it, so I'm going to draw this all the way down. Then I can maybe actually see both at the same time. So, and right now I'm just tacking it down very, very simply. Most of the time you at least do like a cross or an X. Tack them down to make it look a little bit.
Now, would you do those like at your cross points?
Yes. They're each going in at the cross point. If you're doing like a really big one and there's giant spaces, you might also want to tack it down in other places. But typically, when you're doing a grid like this, you're going to tack it down at the cross point. It gets really boring if I make you guys watch the whole thing, but you can kind of already see, so I hope you can see, stupid camera, the difference between where it has been tacked down and where it hasn't. So those are kind of my go-tos. See what I mean by embroidery being way simpler when I explain it than it actually is, because that goes incredibly quickly. I don't even know how long I've been talking, but probably not very long.
About 20 minutes.
Okay, I could have been longer. Is that including the water spill?
Yeah. Well, maybe 25, including the water spill.
Alright. So yeah, those are my basics. That's what I build most of my stuff off of. I guess I'll open it up to questions if there's anything in particular people want to know how to do, or any clarifications on the fact that my webcam quality isn't all that great.
Sean, did you have questions?
Basically, when you were doing the chain stitch, I obviously missed the initial part of it. So it's you come out from underneath, you make your initial stitch, right? And you're going back underneath, and you go back over that same piece again the second time.
Under it.
Through the hole, basically.
Yeah. You make a little starting stitch that's just a normal stitch.
Okay.
This is technically reverse chain stitch.
Okay.
It is 10,000 times easier than what will be defined as a normal chain stitch and looks virtually identical. So don't use regular chain stitch unless you've got something very specific. So you got the little tacking stitch there.
Yep. You come up okay.
Bring it up.
And that'll go in at to the edge of the other one?
Goes through,
Oh, okay, I see what you're doing.
under the loop.
Slide it through the tacking stitch. Make a loop. And then you're just going to keep doing that using each new link as the anchor for the new loop.
Okay. I've been considering getting in the cross stitch and stuff like that. Like I ended up doing some stuff in the A&S, and I'm like, okay, I pretty much got this. And then I'm like, before I master, like, let's try something new.
And cross stitch is, if you have patience, one of the easiest to get the hang of and the hardest to master ever. Because cross stitch has no guesswork. It's, you have your grid, and you have your instructions, and you're following it. And that is really easy, but the patience involved is obscene. So I didn't bring any of the cross-stitch stuff because that's very repetitive and doesn't really show very well on camera, but you can do some pretty cool stuff with that.
Long and repetitive, that's nothing what I'm used to.
Yeah, I actually often recommend cross-stitch to chainmailers because you're already well used to that.
Maybe one day I'll start cross stitching.
You can get very tiny kits if you ever want to get a feel for it. Just like anything.
I'll watch this video next time I do.
Alright.
But, yeah, so if nobody, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, well then, I guess go ahead and wrap up.
Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much what I got. If anybody ever has any questions, my real name is Julia. You can find me on the Caradoc page, as well as ANS Anonymous and the main Amtgard group, and etc.
Thanks for hosting.
Thank you.
Yay! Thank you for having me.
Stop.